welcome back to the Local Legends. Jonathan Wells here hosting this again today. And we've got my man Craig here, who, if you don't know Craig, you definitely will by the end of the episode. And you should. He's a really cool person. So,
Well, thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Craig, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, let's see. I've been in real estate now since 2001. So whatever that is, 24 years or something like
Yes.
that. Prior to that, I joined the military when I got out. I graduated Lake Central in St. John here in Indiana. Then went straight into the military. Basically, I was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division for 4 years, which was a fun kind of wild ride, I guess. I mean, to take a 19-year-old kid at that time and make him face his own mortality every time he steps out of that aircraft, it's kind of a weird thing. But I think it gave me a good foundation for life and life's challenges that it throws at us every day and things like that. Now, I mean, I'm divorced, sorry, with two sons, and they're grown sons. One of them actually just graduated Marine Corps
Nice.
boot camp, and then in Marine Corps band. He's a Marine Corps trombonist, instrumentalist, or something like that.
Sure.
So he's really excited. He's really happy. And my other son is doing cybersecurity, and he's actually doing kind of a quasi-military and DeVry have like a joint program where they have a cybersecurity program, and he's pretty excited about that. And I think he finishes that up in July. So he's excited about that. And then after I got out of the military, moved back up here where I'm from, and ended up buying my childhood home and raised my two kids there, or partially. And then now I'm in Cherville. I used to run another brokerage. Well, let me go back, I guess. Getting out of the military, I didn't want to kind of like tie my life to another person or anything like that. Like I wanted to work for myself and be in control of my own time and schedule and things like that. Because the way I look at it is, if I go to some 9 to 5, I always say trading dollars for hours, right?
Yeah.
If I'm going to do that, I have a hard time, and this is just a mental thing, but I have a hard time saying my life is worth, at that time, $7 an hour or something like that. Like an hour of my time, that's what it is. And I always had a problem with that, even though, we can always calculate what our hourly rate is after we do our taxes and stuff like that.
Right.
And we get all sad after our accountants work their magic, But so that's what what's funny too is my dad. I remember having this conversation with my dad, and he's since passed away, and that was a tough thing too, losing a parent and someone you talk to all the time and help give you guidance. And my dad was great at it because he didn't try to kind of steer me in any direction. He would just, hey, I don't know either, son. I haven't figured it out either. I mean, life is, everyone older than us always makes it seem like they've got everything like put together, but most people are, just getting by anyway.
Right.
And so my dad sent me this. He said, "Hey, I'm going to send you a book, and you need to read it." And then I said, "Okay." And I was telling him, "Hey, I realized I ran away from this decision 4 years ago. The big, what am I going to do with the rest of my life decision?
Right.
And he sent me a book, a pretty famous book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. I don't know if you've read it or anything like that. Robert Kiyosaki wrote it. It's a great book. It ignited some ambition and things like that within me. And I noticed one thing, they talk about wealth, and all these guys that built generational wealth and things like that, they all used real estate in some way, shape, or form.
Sure.
Right. And at the time, my ex-wife and I lived in a little one-bedroom apartment right off a military base. I had no clue about anything. I remember arguing with my dad that you'll get a kick out of this, Jonathan. So I'm arguing with my dad that you can't sell a house until you pay it off, because that mortgage is a lien and you got to clear the lien.
Yeah.
And my dad just like, "You're an idiot, son." He goes, "You can apologize to me when you figure it out." And sure enough, by the end of real estate school, I was like, "Oh, I'm an idiot, Dad. Sorry." And so that was cool. And I always say this, I learned the hard way.
Sure.
When I first got started, I did open houses 7 days a week in this new construction neighborhood in North Carolina, Wessex Place. So anyway, I would stand out there. The properties were just being built. There was some some framing done, and there's a couple parts of it that were done. So it was like a new phase. And I had Ford or a Chevy Blazer. I would tie balloons off on it, and basically I would just stand there and wait. And I was ambitious. I mean, anyone who drove by there, I would stop them and ask if they wanted to buy one of the houses. And sure enough, it just ended up working out for me. And then I moved back up here, and I had some great mentors in the business. And that's what I would say for rookie agents and new agents. One thing I recommend, if you can get on a well-established team,
Yeah.
I highly recommend that for at least, I would say, your first 2 years in the business.
Yep.
Because they're going to show you how to generate business. I mean, real estate,
Right.
it could be fun, but one of the biggest aspects that's overlooked, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's agents generating business. You
Right.
know, like you do it well. You're out there talking to realtors all the time. You're very publicly, you're seen, you're out there, you're engaging. You know, if you don't do things like that, you know, in real estate, business is rarely going to fall in your lap.
Right.
Unless you join a team.
Right.
You know, and the one thing we saw with like mega teams and team growth over the last probably 5 years or so is that teams can then soak up all the leads and control some of that buyer business. So it's an interesting dynamic and kind of a change or a disruption that we haven't seen in our marketplace for a long time. So it's very interesting how that kind of stuff happens. And but besides joining a team where you can get access to like leads or better access to leads and stuff like that, the training I think is good. You get a lot more real world. You know, you can join certain teams and you could be showing houses later that afternoon.
Right.
So you get more at bats, you know, to get better in the business. You know, we all learn by experience, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that you touched on a lot of different things there. And we'll come back to a few of them, but I think the one that, you know, going back to talking about the team stuff, right? Like if you're new, whether, I mean, it could be any business, but we're talking about real estate today. So, you know, you need to have those more at bats, right? And so that's one thing that like I always struggled with, you know, when I was starting my business is that, you know, there wasn't really, I mean, there could have been like a team that I could have gone and joined, I'm sure. But to the extent, like I was working for my dad at the time, right? So I'm not going to leave him and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so there was no like real business that was flowing in. Like you had to go out and get your own, right? Which I think is how it is for most loan officers and everything else, to be fair, especially for real estate agents too. But there's like I feel like the first 3 years of my career, I was just getting my name out there. I was closing a few deals here and there, but it was really just building up who I know and the sphere that I have, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of real estate agents, they don't have that luxury because they're still living at home for a lot of those first 3 years. They might not have that same luxury where they need to start getting business in now so they can start paying their bills.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, like there's no shame in joining that team for the first 2 years, getting your experience, getting those at bats, figuring out how to fish and figure out where the business comes from. You know, and then like, so the first 3 years for me was just cutting my teeth and figuring out what's going on. And then after that, I was too stubborn to actually join up with anybody because I'm like, oh, well, like I know everything now. And if I join, then, you know, I'm going to lose more money. But what I didn't realize at the time, and like it kind of worked out for me anyways, is that like, yeah, I probably could have done more business and yeah, I'm going to get paid less per deal, but I'm doing more business.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And I think that's where a lot of agents, you know, that maybe you're a seasoned agent that you know a lot of stuff. You've been in the business for 5+ years, but your production, you know, you're topping out at 5-6 million a year in our market.
Yeah.
Which is still not bad, but there's also room to grow. And so if you know, like, okay, great, like my weakness is, like if I'm in front of a client, I got them closed, I can make it happen. But my weakness is finding those clients, right?
Yeah.
And so I think joining a team makes a lot of sense for people like that as well. You know, that just need those more at bats, and you know, the team leaders, that rainmaker that's shoveling off, you know, all of these different opportunities to the people on the team. So
yeah, I totally agree. Like I like that, and I think that's a smart thing. And it's funny because, you know, I've been in management now in real estate brokerages for probably about 15 years. I think, roughly around there. And I see the agent progression happen, you know, and especially someone who starts off on a team. And I'm talking about normal, like semi-ambitious agents. Like, you know, there's some agents that are great team members. They just want to be on a team. They don't have to hustle to get new business, but they have to work and maintain what comes to them. But then you have your more ambitious people, which seem to become team leaders and rainmakers and stuff like that in our industry. They're the ones that drive a lot of, not drive traffic necessarily, but they're a driving force for our industry for sure.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when I see like a rookie agent, here's what I see a lot of times. You know, they join a team, they start getting a little bit of success, they write a couple deals, they do that, and then they think that they're bigger than the team,
Right.
and then they go off on their own, and they really flounder and either end up going to another team or sometimes getting out of the business, and some will survive.
Right.
That's true. But and I think it's funny because you get a little bit of success, and then you change what got you that success. You change it or
Right.
try to do it yourself. And most people are too embarrassed or too like they don't want to like lose face or whatever by going back to the original team. But I think, like I said, if you anything you do, I've been doing this 20 something years. I get better every day. I
Yeah.
learn new things every day. And my skill set now is more problem solving when you're at like kind of broker management level.
Right.
I spend a lot of my day managing transactions that are experiencing problems and things like that. And one thing that I was really fortunate to be with some great mentors earlier on in my career. Bill and Jane Brines were my first kind of like team leaders. They got me involved in Mike Ferry's coaching program, which Mike Ferry. Everyone knows Tom Ferry.
Mhm.
Mike Ferry is Tom's dad, and Mike Ferry basically taught back previous kind of previous to now, because I don't know that his original thing works as well as it used to.
Sure.
But basically, it was cold calling.
Right.
I called so every day from 8:30 to 9, I would be role playing with an accountability partner, or I was on Tom Wold's team for 2 years, and I had a lot of fun working with Tom.
Mhm.
For everyone who knows Tom, Tom's one of the best salesmen I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
It's fantastic, and he was just the master of expired listings.
Yeah.
And I was not very talented with expireds for some reason, but I would argue that I was almost equally as good as Tom with for sale by owners for some reason.
Sure.
I think there's two types of salespeople, in my opinion. You have your soft closers and your hard closers.
Right.
A lot of your alpha type personalities are going to be doing your hard closing and stuff like that. And Tom was a good hard closer.
Yeah.
And he did it effortlessly and in a way that was mild pressure, which is his finesse was impressive. And I was just a soft closer. So I tend to work better for sale by owners. For sale by owners, I understood them.
Yeah.
They just want to save the money. They don't care about, 99 out of 100 don't care about doing it themselves. There's 1 in 100 that's pissed off at their former agent.
Right.
And they're mad, whatever, and they
Or the people that they change their own brakes too,
Yeah, exactly. Those are the ones. Hey, good luck with that, but those people, that's fine. I just let them go,
Yeah.
But the other people, and then it just came to, there's a lot of great scripts that were out there. Mike Ferry's like, when I know probably the close that made me the most, or maybe the most successful for sale by owners was, if I could sell your home in the next, 30, 60 days and still net you enough money, would you consider hiring me?
Yeah.
And that was as much pressure as I ever needed to use. And because then they'd say, well, Craig, how can you do that? And I would say, great question. I'll be by today at 4. Let me take a quick look at your house.
Yeah.
Let me see what I can sell it for. I go, now, and if I can't make those numbers work, do you have any trouble telling me no? And they would say, well, no, Craig, I don't. I say, okay, good. But if I can make the numbers work and I can show you that I can do all this, take all this process of the sale off your plate and get you enough money, are you going to be able to say yes if I can prove that to you?
Right.
Well, I don't know how you're going to do that, Craig. I said, yeah, but would you be willing to that? Yeah, I would, Craig.
Yeah.
Okay. And that got my foot in the door. And I'll be honest, I priced things out accurately. And many times I couldn't do it. And I would just walk away.
Yeah.
Or sometimes those people would call me back and still list with me.
Right.
And things like that. So I think, anyway, to go back to like the Brines.
Well, real quick before you do that. So one of the things you did there that I really like that I want people to know is like when you're on that phone with that client, you're soliciting a no from them, right?
Okay.
And so that is like, it's a newer thing that I think that I saw it like a couple of years ago, and then like now it's becoming really popular, like the reels that I watch and everything. But when you're in sales and you solicit a no, you're allowing the other person to have control of that conversation, right?
Okay.
And because if you think about it, if you get a call from a telemarketer, they're trying to get you to say yes all the time, right? So every time that you're on the phone with somebody and you're asking them questions that elicit a yes response, they feel uncomfortable because they feel like you're trying to sell them something, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point.
Now, if you elicit a no, they feel like they're in control of the conversation and they're more comfortable on that call with you. So if you're like, for people that know me, I'm going to give away one of my secrets here. if you notice, like every single time that I call somebody, the first question I ask them is this a bad time? Because if it is, great. Okay, I'll call you. Oh, when's a good time? I'll call you back 30 minutes from now, an hour, whatever. But they're like, oh no, this time works. Great. Now we're in.
Yeah, that's cool.
So
That's cool. I never thought about it like that.
little trade secret.
Yeah, that's cool. I do like, okay, and that script, by the way, that was a Mike Ferry, for sale by owner approach script or whatever they call it.
Mm-hmm.
But so I didn't come up with it. And I've been to a bunch of Mike Ferry seminars, and actually I was at Tom Ferry yesterday. So
Nice. Yeah. Okay. I didn't even know that it was happening. I just saw everyone's Facebook post, and I was like, oh, didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, and I love Tom Ferry's energy. I mean, it's you can't go to a Tom Ferry event and come back unenergized and unmotivated. Like it's impossible. And I do think, professional agents should go to those. At least you should go to some kind of seminar, at least I would say twice a year. I would say
for sure.
Yeah, because it's like our job is not physically demanding at all.
No,
but it could be very emotionally, mentally draining. It could be tough. And then so it's kind of like this. I mean, to make your body stronger, we go to the gym.
Right.
If you're having motivation problems, and I'll tell you, I see it a lot right now with agents. I see agents that, we just had the weirdest COVID market. If anyone got into the business from 2019 to today,
mm-hmm.
you have experienced a weird market that is very abnormal.
Yeah.
You experience a dominant buyer's market and then almost a collapse, I would say, a year, not a collapse, but a definite slowdown. And now the market's getting weird. Agents are having to ask for price reductions, which have never happened,
Yeah. Sometimes it's your first conversation of that, depending on when you got in the business, right?
That's true.
Like you're having, you're used to those conversations. You've been selling business, since 01.
Yeah.
But you've got agents that's their first conversation having, and they've been selling real estate maybe for 4 years.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's like they'll put a listing out there. I mean, before you could almost price it for sale by owners were easy during COVID. If there even was one, if you could find one. Because you can call them and say, hey, I'll add my commission on top of that. And boom, you got a listing, and you got multiple offers, and it's sold. So anyone who didn't take advantage, sorry. Well, thank you. Because
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Party's over.
Yeah, party's over. And agents in my office, they'll come to me every once in a while. I'm like, hey, Craig, can you train me how to call for sale by owners? I say, absolutely. And you know what I do? I go on the internet and I look at a for sale by owner nearby, and I call them live with them on the phone right there. And I go through that, and the last one, I listed a property in Cedar Lake. I went it ended up not selling, but neither here nor there. The thing is, I went and got a listing, and and I'm not a manager. I guess that it's like in the Bible they say give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him to fish, feed him for life.
Right.
And I look at that, and I also do it. This is a self-directed business.
Yeah.
I hate to say, and this is a trade secret that I guess I will give up. Sometimes I will give my agents, especially if they're in my training program, I will give them a challenge, but not tell them. Like I might give them half of the information on what to do and see what they do. Like I was meeting an agent I was doing like a first-time homebuyer seminar or something like that.
Sure.
Right? And I gave partial information just to see, because realtors typically, we've got to be aggressive. Mm-hmm. Usually we're the fun people anyway, we want to meet, hey, who are you? We can strike up a conversation at the grocery store line or something like that, and just not be intimidated by other people and stuff like that. We have to be open to be able, because we're meeting new people all the time if you're busy. Right?
Exactly.
So I like that. So I think all those things are important. And like I said, I want to see who's self-directed and who's not.
Right.
Because and another thing too is, I've had some great agents. I mean, there's some phenomenal agents that have went through my training program, mm-hmm. or I've managed them at my brokerage and things like that. And I'm proud to watch how good they do, especially the ones that kind of took all that direction, mm-hmm. and went for it. And that's cool, because a lot of people. Brad Eriks was one of the last ones that I trained at Berkshire Hathaway, and it was great. Brad was the first agent that ever went through my training program and did everything that I told him to in like the shortest amount of time possible.
Yeah.
Like Brad, I'm like, okay, do this, call your sphere, do that, establish your, rapport with your sphere. He's like a couple days later, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like, okay. I'm like, okay, for sale by owners. He comes back, I'm done. Okay. Expires. Done.
Yeah.
And then the final one was, I go, listen, man, no one's ever done this before, but here's what you need to do now. Builders. I said, go drive around Gates of St. John. This is probably whatever, 6 years ago or something like that. I said, drive around Gates of St. John. Any builder sign you see on a lot without a real estate agent sign, call that builder and ask them if they want business. And Brad actually, he talked to Precision, and he actually listed a whole Precision neighborhood.
Wow.
And Precision typically did not work with,
Yeah.
or they were difficult to work with,
Yeah,
or
for sure.
difficult to list their property.
Right.
And he typically sold his own, so he didn't need agents, but he did. So I was so impressed by that, and that's really, I think, what gave me a lot more confidence as a manager, that, hey, look, I know what you need to do.
Right.
And the rare thing is finding someone that's willing to do it.
Yeah.
And take direction.
Right.
You know, I remember when I first got into coaching, the first question they asked, are you coachable? And I found out I'm not as coachable as I thought I was. Because I think our egos hold us back from a lot of things.
Yes, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and to touch on that too, right? Like, yes, I think that, egos tend to hold, obviously, anyone that's in real estate, your ego can hold you back, and it probably does for a lot of different things. I also think that, like, at the same time, there's no way that either of us would be in the positions that we're in now if we didn't also fully believe in ourselves to be able to do what we were doing and what we can accomplish. But the question I want to ask you is, like, every time that I, search up like advanced real estate, right, and I see like the agent roster, or my buyer's putting an offer on one of the listings that's from an agent in your office, and I just look up like, okay, who's this agent? I might know them or might not know them. I'm gonna look at their production and see their numbers and see, check them out on socials and see who they are. Like, I'm not trying to like glaze you over here, but like I do see a pretty stark difference between the agents that work at Advance versus just your typical run-of-the-mill agent, right? So I feel like the agents that work in your office, they do more business, they're more professional on social and in person. They have a better reputation. Like, obviously there's some correlation to that compared to like just the average agent that's on the street. So how are you cultivating that, and also how are you weeding out the people that are potentially join or are looking to join your brokerage, that I don't know if you're ever like turning away agents from joining, but there's also, I'm sure, probably some filters that you have as to, okay, we're just not going to pursue this person.
Yeah.
So how does that work?
I do that. Like I said, early in my career, it was Jane Bryant who told me, Craig, one of the hardest things you need to focus on and you need to do in this business is maintain a good reputation.
Yeah.
She said it is so much easier to work with an agent that is well liked and that's goal oriented or solution oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And bad news travels, as we all know, at the speed of light.
Oh yeah.
And not to say that I don't have occasional instances with some of my agents posting something on social media or something like that. But I think one thing, and I need to be a better recruiter, because and my brother would tell you right now, I should be out recruiting right now and things like that. It's, for me, I want to build. So I don't feel like I conquered for sale by owners, but I kind of feel like I did. Like if I was hungry right now, I could go get on the phones right now and start calling for sale by owners, and I can put some signs in the ground, get some sales, and that's fine. I have that confidence that I can do that. But when I got into management, I was supposed to be buying a previous brokerage I was at, and I was just a producer there. I was not in management, and I quite frankly didn't think that was important to me.
Sure.
I was making good money. I didn't, I made great Northwest Indiana money,
Right, yeah.
And I'm no one in Chicago, but I could do whatever I wanted here. It was fine.
Get a lake house in Monticello or something.
Yeah. I got a couple houses on Lake Schaefer. A couple rentals. Yeah. Or my land trust might.
Yeah.
Anyway. So I did. What was I
we're talking about like, you're making good money for Northwest Indiana, and you were working to buy the brokerage and everything.
Yeah, I was going to be buying the brokerage, but I learned, okay, in the military, they kind of teach you, they teach you, I'm very methodical or logical when I work through this problems, right?
Sure.
So I looked at it as, okay, you want me to buy the brokerage. Okay. To do that, I need to know how to recruit agents. I need to know how to train agents, and I need to know the I understand the inner workings of business. Real estate agent themselves are already an independent contractor, so I'm dealing with self-employment tax. I'm dealing with all that stuff already, so I know. Right. And I was I was relatively intelligent enough where I knew basics of accounting and stuff like that. And so I wasn't intimidated by any of the numbers aspects of it. But training and recruiting are two things that I didn't have firsthand knowledge. Now,
Sure.
obviously, I knew how to train, or I could train the way I did my career and things like that. I can follow that exact plan and do that. So training, and I did that, but like, well, anyway, I won't go through all the list of names of agents that, I've touched their careers somehow. But, they're fantastic agents out there. And, two things that I always, well, anyway, the last part of the thing was recruiting, which I still struggle with, quite frankly, because
Sure.
again, I'm a little stubborn and mildly coachable. So I like to do it my way.
Yeah.
And I find with a lot of brokerages, I hate one thing that is my biggest pet peeve is bait and switch.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and I won't mention any of the other brokerages, but there's many brokerages where they train, they pad everyone's numbers. Like, let's say you did 20 sales last year and you're interviewing with this other brokerage. Oh, you're going to make more money here. And they show you all this stuff. But then they look at your, they've got you at, like, let's say 26 transactions. And they say, well, you're going to do more deals with our thing. So the numbers always look better,
Right.
but they've padded the numbers, and that's not fair. Well, and not my opinion.
Right.
And I always felt, I was only going to be honest. I'll interview people, and let's say my brokerage makes less money off a team member versus, an agent on their own.
Sure.
If I was just looking out for me, I would put them on their own and hope that they succeed.
Right.
But if I'm looking out for that agent, I'm going to say, you know what, you need to be on a team. Or sometimes I see things that they don't. I know this person acts like a self-starter, but I judge based on actions.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're not going to do it.
Right.
They're 15 minutes late to the appointment. They were this, and I always ask, hey, why'd you get in the business? And when they say, oh, I want to control my schedule and do all that, then I know they're going to be sitting at home watching TV, doing laundry, waiting for the email to come through or a buyer lead or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not how you're going to build a top agent career.
Right.
That's not how you're going to build a sustainable business where you can do all that. And then, and again, that's fine, to each their own.
Yeah.
But if they say, hey, I want to, like Brad kind of came to me and said, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to work. I came out of a different career field. I'm getting to the age where I want to start focusing for retirement and things like that. And I'm going to do this, and you just tell me what I need to do.
Yeah.
And so I like that. I like to spend my energy helping those agents and things like that. But I love watching the agents grow.
Yeah.
I don't get excited anymore when I list a for sale by owner or something like that. I mean, I love helping people and things like that. And I think a lot of realtors are people pleaser personality types, which I am.
Yeah.
And I think that's great, helping others. It's great. I mean, I love our job because it's like we get to help people, our friends and family, do something that they have to do anyway, buying a house and things like that. We get to be their rock going through that transaction, and I love that we get paid to do so. And
absolutely.
And we can get paid a lot or little. It's really how much value you give to the marketplace.
Yeah, definitely. So on that note too, right? Like, I think that, I go to different seminars that are geared towards the mortgage side of things, right? Just like how you're talking about Mike Ferry and everything. So you've got, I feel like and it's not really it's not a lie because anybody can do what we do, right?
Yeah.
And like, it's not, I would say it's simple, but it's not easy, right? That's the best way I feel like to describe our industries and just business in general, right?
Yeah.
Like, the whole premise of business is pretty straightforward and simple, but it takes a lot of grit. You got to put in a lot of hours. You got to make a lot of connections. You got to keep that reputation, et cetera, right? So the biggest thing that I always see is like, okay, I'm in this room and there's 300 people in there, right? And, the whole goal is, oh yeah, I want to, make, 7 figures or whatever this year, or I want to close this much in business, or I want to do like whatever it is. And, I get that that's why everyone's there. But, also in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, well, like, not everybody in this room is going to be doing that either.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's only a select few that are going to get to that level, because it is just that much further of a grind. Right.
Yeah.
So, as a managing broker, like, and it sounds like you do a lot of this stuff, from the conversation we were talking about previously, where, not that you would ever limit somebody, because that's obviously not what you're doing. And that's, we'll get that out of the way, but like, almost like, okay, this person, they're happy with doing 10 deals a year, right? So, okay, I'm going to make sure that they fit into this puzzle piece, which is on this team doing this activity, right?
Okay.
And then there's someone like Brad Erics comes through and is like, hey, I want to dominate. I want to just crush it. Great. Okay. Yeah, you're going to be a team leader. Maybe not right in that moment when you first met him, but you knew that he was going to be a team leader at some point, most likely,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
And then you've got like somebody else, and I'm sure there's probably millions of examples that we both know of the agent that like they're good, they just potentially lack the drive of going out and getting a lot of their own business, even though they're really good at being an agent. So for that agent, you have the conversation of, hey, like you're going to make the most amount of money possible by being a buyer's agent or a listing agent on this team, because you can go in, you can execute, you get the work done, and you have no problem working 60 plus hours a week.
Yeah.
You just, for whatever reason, you don't want to go out and do as much with your sphere and actually be the rainmaker, right? Yeah. So how do you navigate those conversations, as a managing broker, with your people?
Well, I guess I try to look for signs that it's real,
Sure.
Right? So, for instance, let's say someone says, "Oh, Craig, I want to make $1 million."
Mm-hmm.
I'll always ask, "Okay, well, what did you do last year?"
Yeah.
Well, last year I had 8 transactions. Did you work the whole year? Yeah, I did. I've noticed people that make, crazy lofty goals. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's almost like a defense mechanism or something where their subconscious knows they're never going to hit that. So when they don't, it's so big of a goal. If right now, for instance, okay, I have a passive income goal. I think goals are a big thing too. If someone is not setting goals, I don't think, or unrealistic goals. Like for instance,
Right.
I have 3. I have 3 rental properties that are totally paid off that provide passive income for me. Right. Mm-hmm. I have a certain number I'm trying to get to, a monthly figure.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let anything stop me until I get to that monthly figure. Right. That's my plan. After that, other personal thing, like I want to get a new vehicle. I want to do this. I'm not doing that. Like I'm not allowing myself to do that. I could do it right now.
Right.
I'm not doing that. I have a goal. I'm going to accomplish that goal. And so I've seen it in this career so many times where agents are, I want to make $1 million, or I want to do, 20 million in production. And I did 3 million last year. It's like, well, that's so unrealistic. It's so that you're not going to feel bad about yourself. Like, let's say a New Year's resolution, if it was like, okay, I'm never going to, let's say you're hungover as heck. And I'm like, I'm never going to drink again. But I drank 200 days of, the last year. And it's like, okay, it's possible.
Right.
But it's like, why don't you just say, I'm not going to drink for this week?
Exactly.
Or, baby step that thing, Yeah. But I think, what's that book? Simon Sinek, Start with Why.
Yeah.
It's a great book, and I think if you don't have a why, that's what keeps you going. A lot of people, maybe we have children, maybe we have, maybe it's just a mortgage payment, whatever it is, or I want to buy a place in Costa Rica or whatever. Mm-hmm. If you don't have some big goal that you are working on, but that goal should be like a 5-10 year goal. That shouldn't be, so if I want to do $1 million in real estate, I would never be, I hate being like a dream killer, and say, hey, it's not, but it's unrealistic. And you know what, I'd welcome, when I say that to someone like, hey, I don't know if that goal is realistic for the year, there's 2 types of responses to that, right?
Yeah.
You've got someone that's going to be like, oh, I'll show you, Craig.
Right.
Or you've got someone that says, oh, you're right, let's make it. Now, if you get the, oh, you're right, you got to keep lowering that goal until they're like, oh, I'll show you, Craig.
Right. Exactly.
That's the attitude you want.
Exactly.
But like maybe 1 in 10 are going to do it.
Yeah.
And it's, human beings, it's like I don't know why we like to talk.
Yeah.
I love to talk. Everyone knows that about me. but I don't go out there bragging, excuse me, about what I'm going to do or things like that, and again, my goal, like even my passive income goal, it's something that I'm going to do because I want to do that. And I'm getting older too. I want to work. I don't want to worry about retirement, and us realtors don't pay a lot into we don't have like a huge Social Security or like a retirement really set up.
Right. Yeah. I think for sure. Yeah. A lot of agents, it's kind of interesting. Like, take Brad Erics, for example, who should be on the podcast at some point here. He's talking about, I want to get into this so I can focus on my retirement. I'm like, okay, that's great, but like realtors don't. I mean, you can have like your own like self-employed retirement plan or whatever. You can
Yeah.
put money aside for that. I'm like, it's not like you just it's not like you're taking 10% out of their paycheck to go fund a 401k either.
Yeah.
So it is pretty interesting, right? Especially since I think a lot of agents, a lot of, I mean, even really successful agents, they have a spouse that has a retirement account set up too.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so okay, so I like that. So going back to that, when you're coaching your agents, you kind of find out, and I would say like that like tipping point of where they know that they can do at least this much, and they can probably do a little bit more than that, but that's whatever like their ceiling is that they've set for themselves.
Yeah.
A realistic ceiling they set for themselves. So when you're talking with, because I feel like, and again, I'm going to reiterate this point, like let's take, whoever, again, there's a few different examples we could give, but the agent that if they were a solo agent on their own, they'd probably close 4 million a year.
Okay.
And then if they're on a team, they're closing 8 to 10 million a year. How do you, I would, keep happy is probably not the right like term for it, but how do you keep that agent, because they're going to, at a certain point, they're going to hit that level like, oh, I can do this on my own and I can go do this. But that yes, it's possible for them to do that, but based on, maybe the drive that they have or some other variables, you think that it's just better for them to stay on the team because they're still going to make more money doing that.
Yeah. Oh, how do I do? Oh, that's a tough one, John. And you know what? I hate to say this too, but most of the time when a team member gets to that point where they think they're outgrowing the team, and
Yeah.
some do,
Yeah.
some do. I mean, Nicole Hanson's a great example of that. I mean, she was on a team, and then left that team and started her own team, and now it's a big team.
Yeah.
They do a lot of transactions, and so I think, and unfortunately, when those team members leave, most of the time they don't talk to me.
Right.
They've already made up their mind. It's like when you make a big decision, it's like you're building up your emotional fortitude for that decision
Yeah.
for weeks up to that point.
Or longer.
Like you're breaking up with someone or something.
Yeah.
Like everything they do is starting to irritate you.
Yep.
And it's like, and then finally you're like, I'm leaving. Like
Yeah.
usually emotionally or internally, so much damage has been done
Right.
that relationship's going to end anyway.
Yeah.
And then so I look at it as, okay, do I really think that they're going to be able to do this? What kind of encouragement can I provide to help? First I love psychology. I love human interaction and how we react to things, how we're motivated to make buying decisions. And just like Mike Ferry and Tom Ferry, they'll talk about NLP or neuro linguistic programming, and I love that stuff. And it's sad to admit that our brains are hardwired to respond differently to certain things.
Sure.
And one thing that I pride myself on is the ability to watch someone's actions for a short, a couple of weeks or whatever, and I can kind of identify where their pitfalls are or what needs to change. And then when they, that I can have a conversation with them that, hey, look, here's what I see. Here's what I think you should do or something. And because of the fact that I'm not struggling or I'm not pushing, I'm not trying to make Advanced Real Estate the number one real estate brokerage in the world,
right,
or anything like that. I'm allowing my agents to grow their own brand, and to do that, they can change my fonts, my logo, whatever. I mean, our signs need to be legally compliant and have the name on there and all that good stuff. But other than that, do whatever you want with it. This is you're the one going out there. I mean, one thing that happened, which was really cool, the industry kind of focused from the brokerage to the agent.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Most agents that are out there, their clients don't even know what brokerage they're at.
Right. No, 100%.
Yeah.
And that's, funny you bring that up too. Like I've worked for technically 4 different companies in my life. Well, yeah. So I started with Hometown, which was a DBA of GVC Mortgage.
Okay.
Then my dad and I left, and he transferred his branch. He went to, it was Midwest Equity at the time, and when we joined up, but like literally the day after we joined, they had sold to Celebrity Home Loans. So even though it was like still the same company, it technically, and we were working with the same people, it was technically 2 different companies. And then, Celebrity closed down, and then now we're at Leader One.
Okay.
So like and obviously I told you, I think offline too, like, my dad and I split our branches. So back in September of 23, So it was basically like 6 months after we joined Leader One, and I was like, hey, I kind of want to do my own thing. Like, we'll break off and we'll stay at the same company, but we're going to be separate, Um, and so, it is like the entire time going through all of that, I still have the same clients, I still have the same people that I've worked with. And aside from whose logos on the pre-approval letter, nobody. They're like, what company do you work for? My clients don't even know what company I work for.
Yeah,
like that's just how crazy it is, and it's so focused on the individual, person, than the brokerage itself.
Well, and I find that's a testament to you also, because they have so much confidence in your ability and you. They don't need to second guess and see what company.
Right.
Yeah. And I think in the 90s and early 2000s, it was about the company. And I happened to be at the time, I was at a Century 21. And then I did some time with Tom Wold at Keller Williams and stuff like that. And then I was back to C21. You needed those big franchises back then. I mean, with the website builders, the CRM systems, just all the platforms, the marketing platforms that they had, really made your life easier as an agent, and it still continues to. However, I would think the MLS technology has gotten so much more. I mean, like, I don't need, prior to maybe 2000, well, prior to MLS is implementing it, probably in 2010-ish or so, where I could directly share my listing from the MLS platform, let's say onto Facebook or something like that.
Sure.
You couldn't really do that but the franchises had it set up.
Right.
So you could do that, and through intermediaries usually that you kind of pay for.
Sure.
And then but now most of the MLSs do it. Zillow is a huge. I'm done trying to fight with my customers and like, no, go to Craig's website.
Right.
They're
right.
like, what? I'm just going to go to Zillow. Like, Zillow's app is way better. Zillow's their presentation. They captured our customers. They're their customers now. And it's like, but that doesn't Zillow. We do different things. A lot of agents, were never big fans and all that. And I was there in the beginning, with Zillow starting it and all that. I remember saying in 2005 or 6, whatever company, there was For Sale by Owner magazine that was in St. John and stuff like that. And I said, whoever can make a national For Sale by Owner database, which is kind of what Zillow started as,
right,
is gonna take our customer, because at that time, if you were a buyer and you would call me as an agent, my main goal was to set up an appointment for you to meet me at the office. So I can do an interview with you, find out what you're looking for, what your goals are in home ownership and stuff like that. Then I'd put the MLS up on the big screen at the office, in the conference room, and we'd go through the list together and we get a list, and then we pick a day to go look at them. Now I find most agents are meeting buyers at the property.
Yep.
Which even became problematic last year with the buyer agency contracts.
Right. Yep.
So, I've seen I've seen this business evolve, many different ways. And it's like, honestly, I would say that's the type of managing broker you should want.
Yeah.
Someone who's been through the great financial reset or whatever they call it from back like 2008 and stuff like that. That changed a lot of things.
Yeah.
And if you, like, I remember being at closings, John, it was sad. I mean, at listing appointments. And I've had husbands and wives crying at the listing appointment at their own dining room table, because they could only bring $30-something thousand to the table to close on their house. When the job market was terrible. I mean, it was a rough time back then. But they have a new job in Texas and they had to move.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I remember we had to bring their banks. I had to ask them to bring their bank statement. Like, that's part of your world, right?
Yeah.
Like, you need bank statements. You're like, why is this so hard for everybody? It should be easy,
Yeah.
And having them, how much money can you bring to the table? And they'd say, Craig, is this going to be enough? I said, I hope it is.
Yeah.
But the market was dramatically going down. It was like, that experience shaped me and helped make me a better, more rounded real estate broker.
Yeah, for sure.
Because, I mean, when people are like, oh, it's slow, it's like, no, there's deals happening every day.
Right.
You're just not finding them.
Right. Well, and I think that too, like, going back to a little bit of the emotions on that is, maybe people that are watching this, they're not talking to sellers that need to bring $30,000 to the table to get out from under their house, but we have similar issues. And I feel like, it doesn't necessarily matter the issue, that if there is an issue, it's going to feel similarly, right? Yeah. Regardless of what is actually going wrong. It could be, the driveway's cracked and the buyer wants that done. It could be something just as petty as that or whatever. But whenever, like, for me, whenever I have those interactions where I know, like, hey, I got to call this client, the appraisal came in 30 grand under, we got to have this conversation now. it's, I always think like, okay, the next call is going to be a little bit easier because I'm having this call right now.
Yeah.
And not just the next call with that client, but just the next time I have a conversation like that in general, because you're getting your reps in, like we were talking about earlier. And I think that, as professionals, there is a certain amount that we have to do, that we need to make sure that we're obviously doing our jobs.
Yeah.
But a lot of the issues that pop up in real estate transactions really don't have, it's beyond anyone's control. And so, knowing that, having the confidence that, hey, like, I'm not the, I didn't bring the appraisal in $30,000 low. Like, let's just figure this out, and we'll make it better, or we'll go on to a different property, right? And so again, just having those conversations, those reps in, it's going to set you apart from everybody else that you're dealing with, or avoiding those conversations.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, I don't want to do as much business because I have to have more of these hard conversations. Whether they admit that to themselves or not, that could be a reason why people hold themselves back from doing more deals.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. I saw this article, and I literally just skimmed the headline of it yesterday because I'm putting it in my newsletter this week. But there's an article out there that by 2030, the average or the median home price across the U.S. is going to be like $614,000.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts on that? And then also, how do you see that influencing our market? Because we are, not that we're like a discount market by any means, but you can have a modest home for, I would say 30 to 40%, potentially, depending on the area, 30 to 40% cheaper than most other places in the U.S.
Yeah, that's a great question and very interesting. First of all, I am skeptical of any economist or anyone who projects that far out.
Sure.
We just experienced COVID, a worldwide pandemic that the likes of which we've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
During that time, there was crazy spending, which is what's causing a lot of the inflation and stuff like that now. And I'm not a politician, I'm not, into politics or anything like that. But it's such a weird time. So I caution any economist that doesn't say, hey, we don't know what's going to happen.
Sure.
And here's what I would say. AI is changing the world instantly. I check AI. I put in all my pills that I have to take from the VA and all the supplements I take. I take more supplements now than I do medication or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it'll tell me like, hey, add this, do this. I am almost living by whatever ChatGPT tells me to now.
Yeah, same.
And I think that's so. I don't know, and I think this is so big picture and so weird. I don't know about you, but I just like to sit down sometimes and just think.
Yeah.
Think about whatever.
Yeah.
And I'll sit usually outside of my patio and just, stare at the trees or whatever and just think, and this is how I came up with things in real estate. Like I have a patent in real estate hasn't done anything really yet, but I'm the only person in the country that can use an autonomous device inside a house to collect video and photos and stuff like that. That drone doesn't exist yet, but I was awarded that patent back in 2019, and then COVID happened.
Wow.
So, because I actually had an appointment with an Amazon vice president that was taking over like a home ownership division.
Yeah.
And then that got canceled because it was like everyone at Amazon then had to go into fulfillment because they were the only ones that could deliver goods, and they were the only ones that could do stuff back, for a short time of COVID. But I always think about what does society look like? What does this look like? What does that look like? I think unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe we're at a crossroads with capitalism, I think.
Yeah.
Like it got us out of the Middle Ages and got us out of maybe more of a barbaric time.
Mm-hmm.
But I would argue we're still kind of similar. We're barbarians in suits now, and we drop bombs instead of using swords.
Right. Exactly. For sure.
And again, I'm not trying to get political, but if you try to skip ahead on what life looks like, even 2030, they're saying right now, by even 10 years from now, human beings might be able to live. Well, they guarantee at least 10 to 20% longer.
Yeah.
But they think by 2040, we might choose whether we have to die or not, because they can 3D print organs. They can, they might find out where consciousness or your soul exists and how to transplant that into a robot or something. I know, like, again, real big picture nonsense.
Sure, yeah.
However, if you sit down and think about it and what things are going to look like, I think we have enough room on this planet for everybody.
Right.
We can figure out how to, manage all the resources. AI is going to be able to figure out how to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
What if we have a ton of whatever in Utah, some resource that they need to use in India for some reason.
Right.
We're not using it. They could use it. They can give us some of this. Like we we're at the point where we're about to have global transportation could be automated.
Yeah.
With Tesla, they've got Starlink satellites across the, so it's almost like, that new, I don't know if the new Tesla tablet that's getting ready to come out next year
no,
or whatever.
About that, no.
It's next year. It's supposed to come out, but it's supposed to be awesome and always connected with no like cell plan. Well, probably a Starlink plan.
Sure, yeah.
But I mean, there's so many cool things, and that's where it's like, they're talking about population collapses and stuff because you have like the boomer generation. Like they weren't having enough kids. Like the greatest generation, they're my grandparents and stuff like that. They had larger families, and
right.
I came from a family of 6. Mom and dad and 4 siblings or 4 kids, and then my ex-wife and I, we only have 2 kids.
Right.
So it's like, so there is something to do that, but that's such a bigger scale, I guess, and bigger picture, and probably for a whole nother podcast or
Sure, yeah, definitely. I mean, so I think that, on the one hand, I can easily see that happening because to your point, like, yes, I feel like people in the US are having less and less children the further down you go in generations.
Yeah.
Because, and part of that is also like, part of it's just a sign of the times, right? Like it's, the traditional stuff of used to be like, oh, get married, have kids, do whatever. I feel like that's kind of gone away with the, with entrance of social media and things of that nature to a certain extent. But you also, I also know for a fact too that like financially, the younger generations way different, where, not necessarily that we're held back, but there's maybe fewer opportunities or college is more expensive or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And the cost of living versus what wages are at entry level, there is a disparity there, right? But at the same time, so yes, there's less people that are, less families are being established and less children that are being born. But you also have a lot of immigration still too, to the U.S. And so I think that, that's where I can kind of see a lot of these, properties getting soaked up is through, you still have people entering the U.S. and the population is not going down.
Yeah.
And so for that, like, for that reason, I think that if you're out looking to purchase a home, you shouldn't buy anything until you're ready to own a home and you're ready to actually make that mortgage payment and you're emotionally and financially ready, right? I think everyone can agree to that.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, so like don't rush it and don't buy a house just to buy a house. But there is a certain level of like, if you didn't buy before COVID, for most people, they can't afford the same house.
That's a great point, Jonathan. And that is interesting. I mean, to your point, I mean, I think I bought my first house in 2002 or 2003. I bought it for $122,000.
Yeah.
And it was a Northgate in Dyer. It was a nice 3-bedroom, bath and a half ranch with a full basement.
Yeah.
And I think I sold it to my cousin years later for probably double the price.
Yeah.
But I could have even sold it for a lot more, but it was to my cousin. So,
right.
I got a deal on it. I gave him a deal. But I think that's so hard now. And it's like, and even now I think there's something with people your age more, like everyone has to be dual income. Like it's so hard to afford to buy a house right now. And I think that's weird, but they're saying with the boomer generation and stuff like that, they're entering retirement. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot of downsizing. Mm-hmm. And what do they call it? The silver wave or something like that. The silver tsunami.
Yeah.
Everyone's waiting for that to begin. And there's probably a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
But if you're in it right now, I mean, that's the time. I always tell people this too, buyers, when they're telling me, oh, is this a good investment, Craig? I said, look, it doesn't matter. This is where you're going to live. Like you should not, hopefully, I mean, statistically, your home is going to increase in value over the years, and you're going to be fine. And it's going to be worth more money than when you bought it, statistically.
Right.
It doesn't always happen that way. Anyone who bought their house in, even during COVID right now would have a hard time selling and, getting their money back and stuff like that, or making enough to cover, like, let's say, realtor commissions.
Well, especially if they paid like an appraisal gap and things of that nature.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
A little bit tougher, and it's weird too because a lot of times, like older people, typically will say like, oh, life's so easy now. It was harder back in my day. I walked 40 miles to school uphill, with no shoes, and stuff like that. And it's like, I think it is harder for someone that's, let's see, what am I, 46? So someone that's like in their late 20s, I think it's harder for them to find an affordable house right now.
Right.
And something has to give there.
Yeah, for sure.
Because, they're either going to be living with family or something, because rents aren't cheap either.
No, exactly. I was like, well, that's the thing too. Like, you're not going to pitch a tent, right? If you can afford not to. So you're going to live with family, you're going to rent, you're going to own a property.
Yeah.
And, I think that it's funny because like I've had a few clients that, they're renting right now for $800 a month. And, it's a, family of 4 total. And I'm like, okay, great. You're spending $800 a month. Like, and I don't necessarily direct the question this way to them, but we still try to get the same info. I'm like, either you're renting in a shitty place or you don't have any space. And sometimes it's both, right?
Yeah.
And so like, for the particular client that I'm thinking of, they've got a 1-bedroom and they just had their second kid. So now I'm like, okay, yeah, you've got 2 kids under, 3 years old or whatever. It's you and your spouse, and you're living in probably a 600 square foot, 1-bedroom apartment. Like, that's not conducive. Yeah, I get it that the payment's cheap and everything, but that's not sustainable, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people that come to me as well that are, first time home buyers and everything, it was funny because like every single person for like, this is probably from 23 through 24, every single person that I talked to, I could tell you exactly what they wanted I could tell you exactly the purchase price that they wanted. And I could tell you exactly the payment that they wanted based off that purchase price.
Is that right?
And the purchase price and the payment difference, it would be like, so let's say rates in 23 and 24 were like 6 to 7%, right? It would be like, in order to get the purchase price and the payment to work for what they wanted, they needed a rate that was 3 to 4%.
Okay.
Which is, and theoretically they could have gotten that 6 months ago, right? At that point. But obviously no longer the case, right?
Yeah.
So that's where, you have this conversation and there, and obviously with anything, you win some, you lose some, right? Some clients are going to work with you, some clients are going to put it on, put the deal on hold or whatever it is. But for all the clients that purchased, like, I told them like, this is the most that you're going to be paying from an interest perspective. Like taxes are going to go up, insurance is going to go up, those things are going to go up, right?
Yeah.
But if rates go up, you're already locked into this. If rates go down, you can refinance. And oh yeah, by the way, home prices over time, they're going to always go up. In obviously most cases, right? I'm sure there's one outlier that's there, so don't quote me on that. But for the overwhelming majorities, if you live in a house for 5+ years, you'll make money off of it.
Yep.
And so that's one thing where like, I had my first condo I remember buying, it was in Cherville. First condo, I paid $174 for it. 2-bed, 2-bath, like 15 or 1600 square feet. Sold it 2 years later during COVID, and I sold it for $230. And I have a buddy that just bought in that same development, and his condo is nicer than the one that I had, but he's gonna end up paying $275 for it.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, that's not an anomaly. There's a lot of homes in our market that have done that.
Yeah.
So from, over the last, let's say 6 years, I feel like a lot of properties have almost doubled in value over the last 6 years. And so that's one of the things where, going back to that article, having those conversations, like telling my clients, hey, I'm not pressuring you. I really like, if you don't buy a house, that's fine, right? Like do whatever is the best for you financially. At the same time though, if you're not going to buy now, when would you buy? And, okay, let's say 2 years from now, or like when rates come down, okay, well, like nobody knows when rates are going to come down.
Yeah.
So like, let's establish a real timeline. Let's say it's 3 years.
Okay.
3 years from now, okay, great. Based on what projections are and what things have been, even in high rate environments, because now we have enough data for that, home values are still going up by 3 to 5% a year. So you're going to pay 9 to 15% more for the same house. And if rates move lower, well, that's just going to spike the amount of people that are interested in buying homes because everyone else said they're going to wait until rates drop. And now you could see maybe 10% appreciation in 1 year.
Yeah.
While you're fighting, you're back at the same level where you're fighting for the same home, and you don't have the money to pay over a list price and everything else. And so I just think that, again, when you're financially ready, like get in that equity game as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I don't think that, both of us, I think, have I don't think either of us would say like, oh, we have FU money and like, we can go retire tomorrow by any means, but we're probably better off than what we were when we started in our careers.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that, for me personally at least, is attributed to just the fact that I did buy a home when I did.
Yeah.
And then I was able to sell that, use the equity to buy another property that when I purchased it, it was new construction, lumber went up the next day.
Yeah.
So, and then that community started developing more and more. And so I made money when I sold that place. And so there's no way, like, I wouldn't have made half as much, that I have saved now without actually owning real estate.
That's a great point. And like there's always economists and always people that will talk about buying versus renting.
Right.
Right. And I can take it even simpler than anything and say, if you're renting a house, at the end of the day, when you're done renting that house, you get nothing.
Right.
If you own a house and you decide you're going to move on from that property and go somewhere else, most of the time, if you were there for, like you said, more than 5 years, you're going to have you're going to have a decent amount of equity.
Yeah.
You're going to have, so now you're going to be able to be like an insured conventional buyer.
Yeah.
And not have PMI, which is going to lower your payment and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You're going to be in a different category. You're going to be able to buy that move up house for almost the same as what you were paying.
Yeah.
The interest rates do make a little bit of a difference, but I forgot what and you probably know this, what is kind of like the fair market rate, like not fair,
Sure.
but like that shows it's usually an indicator of a healthy economy.
Yeah.
The banks are making some money. The bond market's okay. Real estate's flowing. It's not going crazy as like a dominant seller's market that we saw during COVID. I mean, I had sellers that could cancel a deal because a buyer asked for a GFCI outlet to be replaced.
Yeah.
And we had 2 backup offers that were cash and higher, no inspection.
Yeah.
And I would warn the other agent, don't ask for anything. I've got a backup offer.
Yeah.
And sure enough, if an agent thought I was bluffing, I don't bluff. I mean,
Right.
realtors can't misrepresent things.
Yeah.
I don't bluff. Now, I will tell you this. Here's another trade secret.
Yeah.
If I use a non-committal phrase like, I might have another offer, that means nothing.
Yeah.
That means nothing. If you can't lock me down to a definitive committal word,
I'll remember that next time we're on the other side of a deal.
you know what? And if you call me out and I'm like, that's correct. I will never directly misrepresent a fact.
100%.
Like
absolutely.
Look, I think life is a struggle enough.
For sure.
And it's like to lie to people and make life harder.
Right.
It's like, well, and let's be honest too. What is that? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We need food, shelter, and clothing.
Yeah.
Are the basic needs. I'm not naked.
Yeah.
I haven't went to bed hungry by any other reason than choice. And
right.
I have plenty of roofs over my head that I could go to in a pinch. You know, so it's like,
exactly.
We need to remember, like, this journey could be more fun too.
Yeah. Sure.
I don't chase a dollar. I chase excellence.
Yeah.
I have a goal. I want to, I have a goal for my brokerage. I have a goal for myself personally. Right now, it's a cash flow goal.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get to a certain monthly amount coming in passively. It's freedom.
Yeah.
That's really what freedom is. It's freedom out of the rat race and out of having to trade dollars for hours and doing all that. The freedom that if I want to go visit just go travel the globe and go check everything out.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I think this earth is awesome. I think, there's so much beauty on this planet for us. It's like, hey, go out there and explore it. Go out and see what you can find. I'm blessed that I get to do this as it was winter. I was driving to the office and there was a water main break like around Jewel. And I see there's all these guys working for the town and the water department, and they're in the water. The water's spraying and freezing. It snows coming down, and they're down there working in coveralls. It's wet. It's gotta be so ice cold. And here I am in my heated car with my heated seats, my heated steering wheel. I'm only cold for 10 seconds as I walk from my car to the door into my 74-degree office or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, and this is what I get to do. I get to sit, look at a computer screen, buy or sell some houses, help some agents do some work, help some agents achieve their goals and stuff like that. And I love that. I love the ability to do that. And I think you have to have that passion. If you don't find what you do have the passion in, and you know what? I tell my sons this: chase passion.
Yeah.
Chase. They always say if you find something you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't found that yet necessarily, but I love helping people, and I do like some time off every once in a while. I think you need those mental breaks to decompress and like for instance, I've got, almost 40 agents in the brokerage that they rely on me to some extent, and I always want to, like, when the going gets tough, like when the market gets slower or something, I'm there every day. They know where to find me. They know I answer the phone when they call me and stuff like that, or they know I'll call them right back.
Right.
Because I know sometimes they need me, and sometimes agents need, even the most highest functioning top producers at times get knocked down,
Mhm.
and it's like, I forgot who said it, but the true sign of a champion is not someone who never gets knocked down.
Right.
It's someone who never stops getting back up.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
I think failure is one of the greatest trainers.
Yeah.
I have an agent right now. We're going through a situation where they're worried that we might end up in a lawsuit, and they are super stressed out. I said, first of all, you don't need to be stressed out about this. I go, a little bit of stress is healthy, so we don't make mistakes.
Right.
In the future, we don't make this mistake again, I hope.
Yeah.
Because lawsuits are very expensive, but we have errors and omissions insurance. We're protected from big losses.
Right.
And I think, I don't know, John, what do you think? I think when I have the ability to remain emotionally unresponsive, I can logically think through things easier.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Absolutely. I feel the same way too.
So I think if you're doing a problem solving and problem solving, you've got, for the most, we've got, let's say, we've got the buyer and the seller.
Yeah.
We've got the two agents.
Yeah.
And then let's say we've got the two managing brokers.
Yeah.
So a typical transaction, let's say you've got 6 people involved in it.
Right.
Sometimes the agents are the one where the problem is.
Right.
Sometimes an agent is I call it hungry for a deal. Like the agent, they've got to pay bills coming up. They need this closing.
Yeah.
Well, the transaction itself doesn't care what the agents need or the brokers need, quite frankly.
Yeah.
The buyer and seller have their own needs. And I think we have to be able to subordinate our egos.
Yeah.
Put our clients' needs ahead of our own.
Yeah.
And say what's right. So when I have a problem like this, I'm going to reach out to the other managing broker and try to work through this, and without the agents who are emotionally invested in the transaction or their customer, and like, hey, we've got a problem. We need to deal with this. Like, what can we do? How can we make this work for everyone? And I think, again, it goes back to what Bill and Jane Bryan's taught me earlier on. Maintain a good reputation, Craig. And a lot of people know me. I'm typically the first guy at the bar at a NIRA event, grabbing a glass of wine or something like that. But everyone knows, typically I'm not doing business at that point.
Right.
I believe, I don't drink in my office unless I'm doing a charity poker thing, or if I'm doing something like that, maybe. But not if I've got appointments. That's my also rule with my agents too, is I tell them, there's always, you always tell the table full of realtors at lunch, because they're all drinking at lunch half the time.
Right. Yeah.
Not all of them, of course, everyone.
Right.
But it's like, but realtors are fun anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But it's like work first. I don't do that if I have an appointment coming up or if I've got other work to do.
Yeah.
You need to maintain your customers. We get paid a decent amount.
Yeah.
They owe it. We owe it to them to do a good job.
Yeah.
And I think that's my big thing. Always put, whether I'm trying to help an agent decide what's the best fit for my brokerage. And some agents I do turn down.
Yeah.
I say, you know what, my system's not going to work. You need all the tools that your brokerage is providing for you right now. I recommend that you stay there.
Yeah.
And I've done that with some real big producers that have come to me. And I just thought, in fact, there was one, anyway, I won't mention any names or anything, but
sure.
But it happens. But yeah, I don't turn everyone away or anything like that. I think it just depends on if my model works. If you're someone who generates your own business, my model is one of the cheapest models out there, which is not because I think it's fair.
Yeah.
And most of my agents, like you said, they're pretty established and they're pretty professional. I always taught my agents 2 things. If you know the contract, and I'm talking about know the contract. And if you don't know the contract, shame on you.
Right.
The state of Indiana, that real estate license that you have, the state expects you to know what you're asking your customers to sign, because it's almost like we know they're not reading it.
Right.
But it's your job to be able to explain it to them or articulate what the contract says. And I have it all the time where agents will call, or I'll see in further conditions, like subject to an appraisal on something with a loan. That tells me they didn't read the financing paragraph or the purchase price paragraph, where it says if there's an appraisal, it's subject to that too. Or they put other nonsense things in further conditions.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like you should always know the contract, because you should, and most agents sadly do not.
Right.
And 2, if you're going on a listing presentation, I started the business at 20, whatever, I think I was 23 or something like that. And I was a baby face, I looked like I was 12 years old, and here I've just got out of the military and all this. And it's like, I used to get that objection all the time. How long have you been doing this?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is it seems like forever. That's always the answer, by the way. You never, but it's 6 hours.
Yeah.
You know, you're not listing the $1 million house, you know, on the golf course,
Yeah.
you know, when you just got started. But if you know the market stats, right?
Yeah.
So I always do my CMAs, you know, I do it threefold. Usually I'll do the house. I want to know everything about that house.
Yeah.
Then I want to know the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Then I want to know the micro market, which usually, like, let's say, for instance, if someone's looking, let's say they say, Craig, I want Lake Central schools.
Yeah.
So I know they've got most of St. John. They've got, you know, all of Dyer and all of Cherville, pretty much. You know, that's what I would consider the macro market. You know, a lot of agents will say, well, I'm only going to comp it out with Dyer houses. And an appraiser is probably going to do that, as you know. However, the buyer don't care. The buyer doesn't care about that.
Right.
So it's like, let's service the buyer. I'll let you and the appraiser figure out value. That's to protect the buyer anyway, and
Right.
the lender. So, you know, knowing the contract and knowing the market, you know, you're never going to be a rookie. I remember I could go in there and some guy would say, well, no, Craig, you know, I think you're wrong. You know, this house down the street sold for, you know, 270. And I could say, well, no, you know, that house is right there. You mean that buy level that's right there? Yeah, at this address? Yeah. No, that thing sold for 245. It was on the market for 65 days. The average days on market for your neighborhood is 72 days. So yeah, they did go under market, but they also went lower.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's funny because you'll find out, you know, neighbors always, oh, I got full price or whatever. No, you didn't.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And now it's so easy. Anyone can go on the treasurer's or assessor's website and see the last title transfer, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah,
so.
For sure. Well, no, I like that a lot too. And I think that, you know, from you starting at a young age and myself starting at a young age too, I feel like it's almost, and also, you know, us both not really being hard closers, to your point initially, you know, I feel like we have to have, you know, a lot of like market data stats, like things like that we can bring to an appointment, whether it's a loan consultation or, you know, a listing appointment, and show like, yeah, this, like I flex my knowledge a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know more about your house than you do, or like, hey, I know more about your finances than you do. Like, yes, you know, you want your payment to be $1,500, but you also need to get, you know, a 3-bed, 2-bath for your family. And in Cherville, you're gonna be paying, let's say, $1,800 for that, right? I looked at your financials, like I know what your debt ratios are. Obviously, don't do the deal if you don't feel comfortable with it. But if it was me, like, you know, I know that I could bring the extra $300 a month, right?
Yeah.
Like, because their debt ratios, maybe it's 20 over, you know, 30, right? So like there's still plenty of room in their budget for everything else that they need to do, right? So you have those conversations with them. And then that way now you're, you know, speaking to them like a professional, you're able to help them, you know, get over that hurdle sometimes that they have themselves of actually going through with the deal. So
yeah. That's great, man. I think, well, and I think you have a similar style that to me, where it's a more of a consultant role and not a salesperson.
Exactly.
And I love when people say, you know, I don't want to get arrested. I hate sales. And it's like, it's not, salesmanship is fantastic. I mean, if you have those sales skills, like for instance, let's say I was stubborn earlier part of my career and I would go to these for sale by owners and I would pride myself on not having a written listing presentation.
Yeah.
Because I thought I talk for a living.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk into these deals. And I still did well, but I probably would have done better because one thing I was not taking, I was focused on me. I wasn't focused on them. And when you run into your analytical types, which is many of them, you know, a lot of times I would say like teachers, engineers, you know, those certain types of professionals, they want to touch stuff. They want to see numbers. They want to, so it's funny. I almost say like, you know, you go, let's say you work in a restaurant, you know, and you're a server and you got a little kid at the table. So you're going to throw some crayons at them and a thing, right? And I'm not picking on you engineers and teachers saying like, I'm going to throw some crayons at you, but I kind of do. I'm going to give them a very detailed CMA. Like I would do my CMA. I just do the 1-line report. I can almost look at it like the Matrix, you know, like, here's the address, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, you know, here's the square footage, here's this, here's the days on market. I can interpret all that. I know, you know, with higher days on market, the original list price was this. It came down, you know, $5,000 and then it sold for this. Like I can almost read that like the Matrix because I've done it for so long. And then it's like you get a new, like, so that doesn't work for an engineer though.
Right.
You know, so then I would print out the details of all the houses.
Yeah.
And they're going to look through there. There's so much data, as you know, it's like so much information on that sheet, but it helps make them confident and comfortable that, hey, I've got the right person here, you know, and I don't have to, and you can identify people's personality types on the phone with the words they use, with the so many things, and eventually if you keep practicing it, you just get better at it.
Yeah.
And the better you get, the more value you're providing to customers. Because again, it's not only, if I'm listing a house and the highest comp in ever is 290,000, let's say, and there's no other reason or rational for it to sell for any higher, or let's say that the house I'm listing is less desirable than the one that sold for 290, you have to have the confidence and the ability to convey that information to the customer, and not be able to walk away. Like if they say, I don't care, Craig, I'm listing at 350. It's like, well, I call it planting a sign. I don't want to plant a sign in your yard. And because even there's a progression with that seller. It starts off, everything's great. Hey, what's the feedback from that showing, if there was one? If not, why isn't my house selling, Craig? That's what it turns to. Why isn't my house selling? What are you doing to sell my house? Why don't you do an open house? Why don't you do a broker open house? Why don't you do all these things? And I always tell people, if open houses, they're cyclical. There's times, if it's new construction, hands down, open houses are very awesome.
Yeah.
You should be, if you have a builder contract, you should be doing those open houses, because people want to go there and look at them and buy them.
Yeah.
If an existing homes in an existing neighborhood, I just don't feel like it's not as effective as it used to be.
Right.
But we still do them to try it, because you never know when it's back in style.
Right.
So I think that's a thing is, I think I skipped around a little bit, but anyway, be willing to move around and decide, what am I going to do? Do what's best for your customers. Do what's, that's what I always found was the easiest thing, is just do what's right for the other person, and things follow. If I make more money off you as an agent at my brokerage on your own, but you're only gonna last a couple months, then what am I really doing? I'm not doing you any good or me any good in the long run.
Yeah.
So it's like, why don't I help you, do this? And I always tell new agents this. It's like, especially when they tell me, oh, I want to control my schedule and all. I say, look, you need to be a jerk boss to yourself.
Yeah.
Or you're going to go back to some other jerk being your boss. And that's just the truth of the matter.
Exactly.
And if you work your butt off for maybe 5 to 7 years in real estate, you'll never have to work hard again in your life. I mean, you can just coast through, if that's your goal,
right?
Or you can push it and see this guy's. I mean, there's agents making millions of dollars in commissions a year.
Yeah.
It's so possible. If any agent can do it, anyone can.
Right. Exactly.
So yeah. So anyway.
Awesome. Well, Craig, I think that's all the time we got here, but I appreciate you coming out, man.
Yeah, and I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. So.
Yeah. No, anytime, man. I had a great time.
Me too.
All right, man.